We are in our final week of our Heart for the House series, and our theme for this series is, somebody help me, what is it? All the feels, all the feels. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about godly emotions, right? That we all have these emotions that dictate our actions, that the way that we feel determines a lot of what we do. What we said in this series is that when our emotions are centered in the gospel and they're rooted in God, then our godly emotions will actually lead us to godly actions. And so today we're going to close out our series. And as always, if something's good, you can just yell at me and say, awesome. If you don't know what to say, you can just give me a little Christian moo. It sounds like this. Amazing. So far in our series, we've talked about the emotions of righteous anger and compassion. Righteous anger and compassion. We said this, that righteous anger is when your anger is driven not by what you're hurt by, but by your beliefs, and it leads you to pray for and move toward restoration in the world. That the difference between human anger and righteous anger is that human anger starts with our hurt, but righteous anger starts with our belief. Our belief rooted in who God is. And the outcome of that is not retaliation like our human anger, but it's actually that it leads us to pray for and to move toward restoration in the world. That righteous anger leads us to fight for God's ideal. And then we talked about compassion last week. We got to hear from some of our mission partners, but our big idea around compassion was this, that compassion is when our proximity and understanding causes our heart to break for the things that break God's heart. So we've talked about righteous anger, and we've talked about compassion, and today I want to close out our series by talking about joy. I'm going to talk about joy. And I want to talk about joy today through a specific lens or a specific context. I want to talk about joy in the context of our giving. And so today I want to talk about joyful giving. Joyful giving. Now, if we're honest, these two words aren't always associated with each other, right? Anyone feel joyful when it's time to pay taxes? Anyone in the room? Only the tax accountants in the room are joyful at that season, right? Like, it's not a joyful season for most of us. Anyone feel joyful when you're called into jury duty? Anyone? No, not really, right? That we usually don't associate this idea of having to give something away, whether it's our time, our resources, away. And we generally don't associate that with an emotion of joy. And if we're honest, when it comes to church and when it comes to giving in our local church, sometimes we don't make that connection as well. That giving doesn't always feel like joy. It more feels like having to pay taxes or having to serve on jury duty. It feels like obligation. It feels like the thing we're supposed to do, not necessarily the thing that brings us joy. And so the question that I want to wrestle with together this morning in our Commitment Sunday as we close out our Heart for the House series is, how do we move from obligatory giving because I have to or I'm supposed to a joyful giving? How do we experience joy? To do that, we're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And while you turn there, I'll give you a little context. By the way, if you don't have a physical Bible, you can grab one from the front desk over there. You can take that, keep that, bring it home. This book, we believe, is not just an ordinary book, but it is a book that it reads us, right? We don't just read it, but when we open it up, the scriptures actually speak to us. They challenge our hearts and our perspectives and the way that we live, and they encourage us to live a life that looks more like Jesus. And so if we read it slowly and appropriately, that the scripture will actually begin to read our hearts. And what we're going to find in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 is a letter that's written by the Apostle Paul to a church in Corinth, to the Corinthian people. Paul had planted this church, and there was a lot of wrestling and kind of struggles within the church. So he writes them a first letter, a second letter, and some scholars believe that this is actually the third. And so there's a letter that's lost somewhere in translation. There's probably 3 letters that were written to them. And we're looking at the second one that we have, but probably the third letter that he wrote. And so Paul writes this letter to the church in Corinth, and he's dealing with a couple of issues. There's a guy in the first letter that we read that was kind of wrestling and doing some things in the church that were sinful, and so Paul says, hey, put him out of the church and until he is restored or until he decides to change. And in the second letter, he says, okay, he's doing the work, like invite him back into the community. And so he deals with that. He also deals in 2 Corinthians with a larger tension that's happening, that there's a group of people who have entered into the church that Paul kind of sarcastically calls the super apostles. These are people who are coming in preaching another gospel. They look really good on the outside. It seems like there's favor and blessing on their life. They're coming with these letters of recommendation, and so everything looks really good for them. And yet at the same time, you have Paul who planted the church, but things are going difficult. Things are difficult for him. They're not going so well. He's been shipwrecked. He's been stoned nearly to death. That there's all of these trials and the suffering that's happening in his life. And the church in Corinth is going, well, if these people are blessed and everything looks good and Paul is struggling, then maybe God is blessing them more than he's blessing them. And so they're beginning to turn their back on Paul and starting to follow these people. And Paul writes to them and says, hey, I just want to remind you that the glory of God is not seen outwardly. The glory of God is seen inwardly. And if you want the clearest picture of the glory of God, look at the life of Jesus, who suffered and died. Friends, hear me. Some of you in the room, the only thing you need to hear today, this is the reason you're here, is that you need to hear that your suffering is not evidence that God has left you, that your suffering is the place that God wants to meet you, that the glory of God can be revealed even in your hardest moments. And so Paul corrects their theology around that issue, and then he moves into a conversation about giving. And he's going to remind them of their participation in a fundraising campaign that Paul was leading for the church. The year before, he had gathered with some of the Gentile churches, the non-Jewish believers, and he shared with them a concern that he had for the Jewish church, the Christians in Jerusalem. And so he starts gathering money in order to support the church in Jerusalem because they're struggling, they're being persecuted, they're going through a lot of difficult things, and they're not able to sustain themselves. And so he invites the church to help the church, and the church in Corinth was all in. They wanted to support, they wanted to be a part at the beginning, but they hadn't yet completed their gift. A year before, they were gung-ho, but the passion was beginning to fade, and they hadn't followed through yet. And so Paul writes them this letter and encourages them to help meet the need of the church in Corinth. Here's what he says, verse 1. Now, brothers and sisters, I want you to know about the grace that God has given to the Macedonian churches. So Paul starts this encouragement around their giving by letting them know about an amazing thing that's happening in another church. And he uses a specific word. He says, I want you to know about help me with this word, grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. This word grace is going to be incredibly important for our conversation today because Paul is going to use the word grace 4 different times, but each time he uses it with a different meaning. The word grace is best understood within the context by which it's said. I don't know if you grew up anything like me, you were given one definition for grace, but as you actually read the scriptures, you realize that that definition doesn't fit in every context in which the word is used. You see, the word grace is defined better by the context that it's in. It's kind of like the word wine in our context. Wine could either be the screaming that is happening from my children in my house, all 4 of them, that is leading me to want to drop kick them in the throat. It could be that wine. Or it could be the wine that Kylie and I are going to enjoy on a Saturday night after we put both of our children to bed. All 4 of our children to bed. They whine so much, I just eliminate 2 of them in my mind, Context matters. It's like the word weed. Like if you were in your yard and you needed to pull some invasive species out of your ground, it's weed. And if you were in California, it's context. Context matters, right? The word grace, without understanding it in its context, hear me, causes you to miss the beauty and the meaning of the word. So what is the grace that Paul's referring to here? Well, he says, I want you to know about the grace that is given to the church and to the Macedonian churches. This grace is actually more of a move of grace. A move of grace. What is a move of grace? A move of grace is a supernatural move of God that stirs souls to Christ. It keeps them, strengthens them, and increases them in Christian faith, knowledge, and affection, and it kindles in them the exercise of Christian virtues. What is a move of grace? It is a supernatural move of God where he shows up in a community and he turns souls to Jesus. But not only does he turn them, he keeps them and he strengthens them and he increases them in their faith and their knowledge and in their affection, and he moves them, hear me, to exercise or to live out Christian values or the Christian life. This is a move of grace. And Paul says this is what's happened in the Macedonian church. That God has showed up and he stirred something up in their midst. That he's doing something in them, hear me, that is greater than what is natural. That exceeds the norm. That's what supernatural it is, right? It's something that is greater than what would naturally occur. It's something that exceeds what is normal to us. A supernatural move of God is happening in their midst. And this is how he defines the supernatural that is happening there. Verse 2. He says, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing, what's that word? Joy, and their extreme poverty has welled up in rich generosity. Wait a minute. Paul, you just said these people are in extreme poverty, and you said they have overflowing joy. How? That's not the way it's supposed to work. These two things are not supposed to coexist. Something supernatural is happening here, friends. That they are in the worst of the worst space, and yet they are feeling this overflowing joy. And Paul says the combination of these two things leads to rich generosity. That should tell us something. That maybe generosity is less about how much we have, and it's more about what we do with what we have. Maybe generosity is less about how much we give, and it's more about how much we're willing to give up. He says they're struggling, and yet they're filled with this overflowing joy, and it's led them to be generous. He said, I testify to you that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege in sharing in this service of the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. Paul says there's a supernatural thing that takes place in their midst. And he points out three things that made this so supernatural. He says, hey, they were generous in spite of their resource. That even though they had little, even though they were struggling, even though they were in poverty, they were still generous. They still gave. Supernatural. It exceeds what's normal. He said they gave beyond our expectations. Showing up in this community, I know what they're capable of. I know what they could give. I have a reasonable expectation from them, but they don't meet that expectation. They exceed it. They go above and beyond. He goes, that's supernatural. But this is the one that really gets me as a pastor. He goes, and they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in service. They begged to serve. I'm like, what church is this? I want to be a part of that one. They begged to be a part. They begged to give their time away. Supernatural. You see, what Paul describes of this church is so different than most of our experience, isn't it? They give when they have nothing. We give when it's comfortable and convenient. But when the bank account looks good and when everything's working the way that we want, then it's very easy to give then. But what about when you are at your lowest lows? Are you willing at that moment? Paul says, if you are, that's supernatural. He says they give beyond what they are expected, that they're not looking through the scriptures going, okay, God, what's the bare minimum? Is it 10%? Is it not 10%? Like, what do I have to do so that you're happy with me and I can keep moving? They go, no, I don't care what the minimum is. I'm going to give beyond what's expected of me. Supernatural. They didn't wait until they were begged to serve, but they instead begged to be of service. They didn't wait until someone said, hey, we can't run the kids ministry if we don't get some more volunteers. They didn't wait until the spouse was like, hey, I'm just so burnt out, I really need some support now. They go, no. If we can be of service, if we can be a part, we're in. Supernatural. And so the question then begs is how do we move from the natural to the supernatural? How do we move from what's expected to beyond what's expected? How do we move from consumer to participant? And y'all, can I just tell you that the more that I've wrestled with this and the longer that I've done this, here's what I've just found to be true. There is no amount of vision that I can give you that changes that for us. There's no amount of storytelling or guilting people into doing something that's going to change it for us. There is no system or strategy that is going to move people from the natural to the supernatural, from consuming to participating. The only way it happens is if God shows up. If there's a move of grace, if his spirit draws us into the depths of faith, if there is a discontentment of reaching the standard and wanting to move beyond, if God ignites in our hearts a faith and a passion for the things that he cares about, that's the only way it happens. How do we move from consumer to participant? How do we move from just doing what's expected to being a part of an extraordinary move of God? It takes God showing up. But friends, please hear me. God does not come where he is not wanted. And so if you will not invite him and ask him to move in your heart and move in our church and move in our city and move in your families and move in the world, then we will not get to experience the movement of God. Paul says, hey, the first thing that happens, and I don't want you to miss this, before we talk about your commitment and what you were supposed to do that you haven't done, I just want you to know a move of God has happened in another church, and I want that move of God to happen for you. Now, how do we know a move of God has occurred? What marks it? Well, it's simple, it's action. How do you know where God's moving? It's what people are doing. How do you know where God's moving? It's how people are responding. How do you know where God's moving? There are actions that are taking place. How do we know that God is shaping a community? Well, they talk different, and they walk different, and they pray different, and they serve different, and they give different. Can I just bring it to 2025 for a minute? How do you know where God's moving? It just hits different. If you know, you know. You can just see it. You can feel it. When God is moving in a people, it's just different. And Paul goes, that's what's happening in the Macedonian church, friends, and it's what I want for you. There's a move of grace that leads them to action. And it continues on, and he says this. So we urge Titus, as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of, there's our word again, grace on your part. Okay, what is Paul saying? The language is kind of confusing. What Paul is saying is hey, you remember last year when we started the fundraising campaign and you guys were overzealous and you all wanted to be a part of it and you even started, you gave your first gift, you were all in. He goes, Titus, our brother, was a part of that process, and he kind of stirred up that affection in y'all, and he led you to give, and that was amazing. But now we're asking Titus to come to you and to urge you to bring that to completion, to not just start with generosity, but end with generosity. To not experience a move of God and then fade out, but to continue in that move of God. And he says, and the way that you continue in it is by an act of grace. So there's our word grace again. But this time, it's not connected to what God has done. It's connected to what the Macedonians have done and what God is wanting the Corinthians to do. An act of grace. What is the difference between a move of grace and an act of grace? Well, this is the definition for an act of grace. An act of grace is an act of loving kindness that requires sacrifice. An act of grace is an act of loving kindness that requires sacrifice. You see, what Paul is wanting the people to understand, and what I hope we will understand today, is that there is a difference between a donation and an act of grace. A donation is transactional. An act of grace is transformational. A donation is about giving from what's in my hands, but an act of grace is about giving what's in my heart. Paul goes, I'm not asking you to make a donation. I'm not asking you to check a box. I'm not asking you to balance your checkbook. I'm not asking you to make sure you get the tax write-off at the end of the year. I'm not asking you to use your credit card so you can make sure you get points off of the gift that you gave. No. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, is your heart stirred for what the people in Jerusalem are going through? Do you care about them? Do you love them? And if you love them, then I want you to give in such a way that demonstrates that love to them. This is not a donation. It is an act of grace. So God moves. There's a move of grace that stirs the community. But that stirring doesn't end with stirring. It leads to action. There's an act of grace that takes part. Here's what Paul is saying. He's saying that our giving is a reflection of our love. Our giving is a reflection of our love. I'll put it this way. No one's going to take me up on this offer, but I'll suggest it. Bring me your bank statements for the last 6 months. I'll tell you what you love. Bring me your Amazon orders for the last month. I'll tell you what matters most to you. Jesus said it this way. Where your treasure is, so your heart will be also. That our heart follows the things that we love, and we love the things that we give to. Paul says, hey, you're giving. It's not just a donation. It's not just a dollar amount. It's a picture of your heart. Kylie and I first got married on our wedding day. Some of you have heard me tell this story, but we gave each other a gift. And her maid of honor knocked on the door, and she comes in with this box, and I see the box in her hand, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I married the perfect person. She knows me so well. Clearly, inside of that box is a pair of Jordans. Like, I know for sure that's what's in there. Now, just a side note, none of y'all walk up to me afterwards going, see, you wear Jordans and not LeBrons. It's fashion. It has nothing to do with basketball, okay? So she hands me this box, and I assume that there's Jordans in it, but when I open up the box, what I find is a wooden box on the inside, and that wooden box is just filled with these sheets of paper that are folded up. And so I open up the sheets of paper and I begin looking through them. And what I realize is that in this box are letters that my wife has been writing to her future husband since 2015. And I read them and immediately begin smiling because I know at the same time she's getting a gift from my best man. And then the box that she's about to open is a wooden box as well, filled with sheets of paper from me that she's going to open up and find letters that I had been writing to my future wife since 2015. We didn't meet until a year later. You see, in the natural, what we gave each other was a wooden box with pieces of paper in it. But you and I know that that gift was so much more than just box and paper. It was a reflection of our heart. And Paul is saying the same is true with your giving. And not just giving of your money, the way you give your time, the way you use your words, the way you give your life is a reflection of what you really love. And so it says there's this move of grace that should lead to acts of grace. And he goes, I know you have that love in you, and this is your chance to show it. But he doesn't end there. He goes on to say this. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love that we have kindled in you, see to it that you excel in this grace of giving. And I'm not commanding you, I'm not forcing you to do this, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it to the earnestness of others. So we've talked about a move of grace, we've talked about an act of grace, but now Paul introduces another idea around grace. He says, I want you to excel in the grace of giving. Let me give you another definition. The experience of grace is what Paul is talking about here. The experience of grace. And what is that? It is that which affords joy, pleasure, delight, sweetness, charm, or loveliness. That there are acts of grace that we do that allow us to have an experience of grace that affords us joy and pleasure and delight and sweetness and charm and loveliness. Paul is saying, I want you to excel in the joy of giving. In the joy of giving. I want you to experience what it feels like to know that you've been used by God. I want you to experience what it feels like to invest your money not in temporal things that will fade away, but in eternal things that will last forever. I want you to experience the joy of knowing that you have stewarded all that God has given you well. Friends, I want you to experience a deep and lasting joy. And part of the way you can experience that is by giving to things that are godly and good. I want you to experience the joy of giving. Church, can I just tell you, I experience the joy of your giving and our family's giving every single day I walk into the office. When I walk in the social house and I look at the walls and I think of the things that have already happened and the things that are going to happen, and I sit down in an office for the first time that I've been able to do that in 8 years. And I'm writing messages on the boards and the scriptures are coming to life. Like there's just this joy that is filling up inside of me as I think about the generosity that our church demonstrated last year. And friends, I hope that when you drive down Green Street and you pass that building that your heart fills with joy. I hope when you show up for youth that your heart is filled with joy. I hope that when you show up to serve at youth, your heart is filled with joy. I hope that when you show up for a marriage night or a special event, that your heart is filled with joy. Because it is in that same building that you gave to last year that last week 3 students started a relationship with Jesus for the first time. It's in that same building that you gave to last year that just a couple of months ago, 5 couples who were struggling in their marriage were connected with 5 mentor couples who would walk with them faithfully. It's in that same building that you gave to last year that someone would come in looking to sell us something and walk out crying saying, I knew that God sent me here for a reason. I hope that you would be filled with joy because your generosity, your act of grace should lead you to an experience of grace. Joy. The joy of giving. This is what Paul wants for us because this is the way that kingdom giving works. That there is a need for grace. In this context, it's the Jerusalem church who's struggling. There's a move of grace that God stirs in a community, a passion for the things that matter to him. moving souls towards him and leading them to live out the Christian life that ultimately leads to acts of grace where we give our time, our talents, and our resources that we might experience the joy of grace as we meet others' needs. Now, here's the wild part about this cycle, is when there's a need and God moves in us to meet that need and we actually act and do it, do you know what happens in us? We're filled with joy. But what does it look like when you're filled with that joy when things are really difficult in your life? What does it look like to others when you're filled with that joy when things are really difficult in our world? What does it look like when you're filled with joy when everyone else is stressed out about what's going on in their world and in their life? You know what it looks like? It looks like something different. And what's interesting is that when we see a need and when God moves in us to meet that need and we experience the joy that comes from the giving, it actually allows other people to see us filled with joy in places and times that don't make any sense, and it makes them aware of, watch this, their own need for God's grace. The cycle just continues, and it never ends. There's a need. God stirs our affection. We act and meet that need. We're filled with joy, and others see our joy and realize how much they have need. This works. It's the way that kingdom giving works. But also, friends, hear me. Paul would say that while this works, and while it's a good system, if it ends there, it's incomplete. That this does work, and this is how kingdom giving is supposed to work, and there are different forms of grace that we're supposed to experience in our life. But he goes, all of this is meant to be a picture, not a process. It's meant to be a picture that points to something greater, to point to, watch this, the saving grace of Jesus. This is what he says in verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty we might become rich. He goes, hey, this idea that there's a need for grace that leads to God stirring up a move of grace, that leads to an act of grace that's met with an experience of grace, is just a picture of what Jesus came to do for us. That our sin creates a need for grace for us. That God in his love would not leave us in our sin, but he would move from heaven to earth, a move of grace in our direction. And there would be an act of grace on a cross where Jesus would take our sin he would take on our sin and our shame, and he would give us his righteousness. And the scripture would say he would do that for the joy set before him. A move of grace that led to an act of grace for the experience of joy in order to meet your need and mine. Friend, this is the good news of the gospel. That God in his love would lay down his crown, would step off of his throne, would trade all of the riches of heaven for the poverty of earth. He would trade perfection for imperfection, righteousness for unrighteousness, salvation for our sin, and he would love us with his grace. Anyone have $1 in the room? Anyone? Dollar bill? You have $1? Great. Here. You take that 100. You see that? That's how you should feel about Jesus. See how stunned he is right now? You see the disbelief? Why in the world would you take my $1 and give me 100? Why would you take my finite and offer me the infinite? Why would you take my brokenness and offer me healing? Why would you take my despair and offer me hope? This doesn't make sense. Jesus, have you gone to school? Did they not do economy? It's a bad trade. And he goes, oh no, it's the best trade. I'll lay down everything that I have, all of my riches, and I'll trade it for your nothing. Friends, this is the good news of the gospel. And if I could be honest, while that's a good picture, it's not even really a good one. Because $100 doesn't do it. I would have to take all of the riches, all of the wealth in every bank, in every country in the world, all of the gold reserve, all of it, put it all together, trade it for that $1, and it still wouldn't be a good enough picture of what Jesus has done for us. And so I almost didn't use the illustration because I'm like, it's not sufficient, God. This doesn't represent you well. But then I felt the Holy Spirit whisper to me, actually, it's the perfect picture for you to use today. And here's why. Because come on, if we're honest, most of you are like, oh, that was cool. It's a good trade. Most of us in the room are like, yeah, that's reasonable. Like, if you're going to give me $100 for my $1, like, logically, duh, I'm going to make that trade. You're going to take my sin, and I get heaven? Of course, who wouldn't do that? Logically, it makes sense. But if we're honest, most of us in the room today, not all of us, but most of us in the room today, are not going to walk out of those doors devastated that you didn't get $100 handed to you today. You know why? Because you don't need it. You're fine without $100. You're okay. You'll just keep on keeping on. And if we're honest in our Western, American, wealthy mindset, it's a good trade, but it's not an ultimate trade. I don't really need it. I mean, I'm a pretty good person. I make good decisions. I manage my finances well. Like Jesus is a great addition, but he's not ultimate. But I'm just telling you, if I were to take that $100 to a mom in Uganda who's trying to feed her family, and she recognizes that for a month her entire family could eat, that her kids don't have to come to her bed at night crying because they're hungry, that she doesn't have to watch another family member die because of malnutrition, I'm telling you, that woman is on her face. She is crying. Her heart is moved. She's filled with gratitude because she has received something that changes the trajectory of her life. And church, I just want to say to you today, if your view of Jesus is that he's like the $100 to one trade, then you have lost your view of who Jesus really is. He is infinite. He is everything. And Paul's going, guys, if you don't get that, of course you're not going to give. Why would I expect you to give your time if you can't see what Jesus gave you? Why would I expect you to give your money if you can't see the trade that Jesus made for you? If you don't have in view the goodness and the richness and the cost of the gospel, then it will never show up in your actual life. And so can I just tell you, my prayer for you as I prepared for this week, our last week of Heart for the House, where we're going to have a commitment Sunday and we're going to ask you to give, my prayer has not been that you would give today. My prayer has been that you would get in view the reality of your poverty and the cost of the cross. Because if we get that, and if we see that, it changes the way we sing. It changes the way we pray. It changes the way we read the scriptures. It changes the way we parent. It changes the way we love. It changes the way we spend our time, and it changes the way that we give. You see, joyful giving is this. It is when we give in response to what God has first given us. That's what joyful giving is. And that's what God wants for you, and it's what he wants for me. And so Paul reminds them, here's what Jesus has done for you. And then he gives them instruction. He says, and here's my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now I want you to finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. For if the willingness is there, then the gift is acceptable, according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Paul goes, hey, I don't want you to give beyond your means. I'm not asking you to put yourself in poverty by giving to the church. I'm not asking you to be illogical or unreasonable. But I am asking you to consider what Jesus has done for you and give in response to that according to your ability. Essentially, what Paul's saying is this. If God gave graciously to you, then you should give joyfully too. Because imagine if I walked up to our friend and said, hey man, there's a family in our church, single mom. She's trying to figure out how to feed her kids this week. She just needs a little bit of help to make it through the week. Could you help her with some groceries? How much is too much for me to ask of him? 10%, $10? 20? 50? I gave him 100. How much is too much to ask? Now, please hear me. This illustration does not work if I take that money back. It's not mine, it's yours. And you have the autonomy to do with it whatever you want. I gave it to you with no condition. Hear me, but I did give it with expectation. And my expectation is that the generosity that he received would be passed on from him to someone else. What you do with it is up to you. But my hope is that if I've been generous to you, you would be generous to someone else. This is what Jesus is saying to us, and this is why Paul says what he says in chapter 9. He says that each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. He goes, consider what God has given you, and in response, give to him. Not out of obligation, don't do it reluctantly. Not out of compulsion because some church had some keys player come up and play keys behind Jesus and Gerald, and everything sounds all beautiful, not that, no. He goes, no, cheerfully, because of what God has done for you. And so in a moment, I'm going to give you some time, just a chance to reflect. What has God done for you? How has he been generous to you? Ask him how he would have you participate in Heart for the House this year. And my prayer is that a move of God would take place in our house that would lead to an act of grace that would allow us to meet the needs of our friends and family, and that we would experience joy because of it. But before I give you the space to contemplate that, I just wanted to end by sharing with you the place right now that I'm praying that God's grace would show up most. It's in 4-day. This is the heart of our campaign this year. It's the most important thing that we're doing. For those of you who don't know, when we started the church, the Lord made it very clear that we were supposed to serve the least of these in our community. In our city, the average family brings in about $130,000 a year. And yet, at the same time, we have 5 or 6 schools, depending on the year, that are Title I low-income schools. 80% of the kids in this school and 5 other schools in our community depend on the school for breakfast and lunch every day, wrestle with housing insecurity, food insecurity, wondering if their lights will be on or off when they get home, wondering if a roof will be over their head. And the Lord just made it clear to us as we started the church, hey, I want you to go and reach and love and serve those people. So the 3rd Sunday of every month, we meet, but we don't sing and open the scriptures, we serve. And we worship God through serving our community. And we've done that since the very beginning of the church, but I feel like God has stirred in us that there's a new way to do it now, that he wants to do more than we've done before. And so I just wanted to let you know as we close about some changes that are coming to 4-day, changes that I hope we will be able to do next year, but it will be solely based on the generosity of our house. So if you want to see this happen, we need your help. Here's some things. One, we're going to reorganize 4-day by passions. So right now, we have 2 different locations that are pretty much doing the same thing, one at a larger scale, one on a smaller scale. And we spent some time wrestling through the scriptures and going, Matthew 25, James, Matthew 28. Hey, God, what are the things that you care about? When you say you're going to return and you're going to separate the sheep from the goats, and there's going to be people who you would call your sheep, what are they doing? And we looked at the list of the things that Jesus said he cared about, looking after the least of these, caring for widows, for orphans, as James would say, going and making disciples of all nations. And we just looked at that list and said, okay, we need to reorganize 4-day to make sure we are hitting all of the things that Jesus says matter to him, and we need to move our people to serve, not based on convenience, but based on the thing that breaks your heart, based on the thing that makes you angry. So let's reorganize the whole thing around passions. And so what you're going to see, starting in November, we're going to pilot it this month, and then we'll do an official launch in January, is that starting this month, our 4-day is going to take place in 3 locations. This location is going to be for vulnerable families. I'm going to detail that in a second, but this will be a space that a family in our community who needs clothing can find it, who needs food can find it, who can receive a hot meal, who can get a haircut, who can be prayed for, who can have the scriptures spoken over them, who can sing together in worship. This is going to be a place that serves families together. And so all of our projects will be around that here. Esther Jackson is going to be a place that we focus on being for marginalized people. And so we're going to have a number of different partnerships and projects where we're able to serve all sorts of different people in prison, widows, orphans, sick in the hospital, all sorts of different people who are struggling to make it through life. And then Social House is going to become our global headquarters. And so we're going to get a chance to serve all of our mission partners there. And so we're going to reorganize by passion and ask you to sign up based on the thing that breaks your heart and based on the thing that makes you angry. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to be adding a number of new projects, some that'll show up in November, some that'll show up next year. But we want to make sure that we're hitting all of the things that Jesus says matter to him. And then lastly, we want to enhance the current projects. We want to make sure that the things that you're doing are a good use of your time, that you feel connected to the Lord and each other as you're doing them, and that it's making a difference wherever we go. So we're going to be making some changes to 4-day, God willing, with your generosity. And it's going to look like what I just talked about: vulnerable families, marginalized people, and missions in 3 different locations. And here are some of the projects we'll be doing. For vulnerable families here, we'll be moving our Spanish service from the gym to the cafeteria so that they can have the same worship experience you guys get every week. We'll be continuing our physical therapy. We'll continue to have Spanish translators who help us to communicate with our friends and family well. We'll be adding monthly haircuts like we do at our back-to-school bash so that kids can go to school with dignity every month. We'll be adding a craft section where we'll be able to share the gospel with kids through crafts. We're going to continue to do warehouse so that kids and families can receive clothing as they need it. Dad can have a suit for a job interview in order to provide for his family. We're going to continue to be for the hungry, our indoor food stand where we provide a hot meal for every family who comes through, our community market where we provide groceries for those in need, and a team of people who are going to go out and shop to make sure we have the things that we need to serve and love these families. You may not know this, but 4-day is only part of what we do. We've actually created a pantry here at the school that anytime there's a kid who says to a parent that they're hungry and they don't have food at home, the teacher can just take them straight to the pantry and they can go home and be a blessing for their family. And your generosity allows us to do that. We're also still looking for ways to support medically, dental, doctors, and so if that's an interest of yours or you know someone, we'd love for you to be a part of that. At Esther Jackson, we're going to be for the stranger, Table on Delk, working with women who are stuck in cycles of prostitution and trafficking. Our hotel food delivery that's going to go to families who are struggling to get by in low-income hotels. Drake House, who works with homeless families and houses them and then helps them to recover and start a new life. Working with orphans in the foster care community. We're going to be working with the least of these, as we always have. Mother Advocacy Project that works with foster kids. Beacon of Hope that works with women who are pregnant and trying to make the decision if they're going to keep their child or not. Working with teachers and appreciating them across all of our Title I schools in our community. Working with Scottish Right Now to provide encouragement and love for kids who are hospitalized. And continuing to cut grass for widows and let them know that they're seen and known and loved. And we're still working on prison ministry, and 2 of our staff are going tomorrow to visit a strip club ministry to see if that's a way we can get involved as well. We're going to be for marginalized people, and we're going to be for missions. Jesus said to go to the ends of the earth, and we're going to do that. And so not only are we going to do a mission trip to Lighthouse and to Lebanon and to Zambia with Baremi, but we're also going to do monthly projects to partner with them to serve their kids and the families that they work with. And we'll continue to serve the Senior Living Center in the heart of our downtown, putting on a worship service for them and fellowshipping with them and loving them in the name of Jesus. And next year, we'll be adding a partnership with Oasis, who will allow us to go into homes of homebound seniors to bring them a meal and sit with them and pray for them and let them experience the love of Jesus. My hope and prayer is that there would be a move of grace among us today that would lead to an act of grace in our giving, that would lead to us experiencing the joy of what happens when we get to be for our community. So the goal for Heart for the House this year, 331,000, 100 adults on mission trips, 125 new volunteers, and 150 new members. I pray that God would speak to you and encourage you on how he wants you to be a part.
You're listening to audio from Home Church Roswell, located in Roswell, Georgia. For more information about this ministry or to give to this ministry, please visit homechurchroswell.com.